Welp, here we go again with yet another new series on my channel. Now, look, this isn't just because I have a crumbling need to upload some form of content in order to get a tiny bit of appeasement out of the almighty YouTube algorithm, okay? Sure, it might be part of a reason, but whatever. Point is, I'm also doing this in order to vary up the content on my channel and, more importantly, be able to talk about games I have played and not have to try and center some form of video essay about a specific aspect of it. And, oh boy, have I picked a weird one as the first episode for this new series. Genshin Impact was a very unknown game for me until fairly recently, to be honest. I may have only heard slight murmurings up till around October, I'd say, in which it just crept out of nowhere into my homepage and from people I was subscribed to. After enough time, and even after hearing certain statements about the game, I decided to take the plunge around November and see what it was all about. 3-ish months later, and what did I think of the game? It is certainly something. Without spoiling anything, you're going to want to stick around to hear what I have to say. So, let's get these impressions and reviews started with already. First things first, before I mention anything else, I will give this game massive props for having quite a bit of content this early on in its lifespan, as well as the fact that all of this is for free. That alone is by far the single biggest selling factor for this game, honestly. You get to determine whether or not you'll like the game without spending a single mandatory buck, along with the fact that the game shall be continuously updated with new regions, characters, sections of the game, and more in the future. Now, I put mandatory there in mid-sentence for a reason, because why yes, as a mobile gacha game, it does in fact have transactions you can use in-game for pulling playable characters, and it should be mentioned that before going forward with this review, that I did not spend a single cent on this game. While I realize that many people are willing to spend money on this game to expedite things, I think a fair and honest impressions of the game should be removed from such a process, to show how the game is at base, as well as for others who aren't willing to spend that money. So any statements I say going forward is from that perspective. Presentation-wise, the game is pretty fine for the most part. I'm going to get into more of the nitty-gritty later, but at a surface level glance, the game looks pretty decent. Colors look nice and vibrant, visual effects and elemental interactions really pop, and there are plenty of environments throughout that have some great views and atmosphere. Off of the top of my head, Storm Terror's Lair, the Stone Forest, the Mountains of Liu, and basically all of Dragonspine, especially when it comes to Dragon's Heart, all stand out in terms of impressions. And in many of these locations, the scale is quite impressive. Once again, Dragonspine is a fantastic region, with the amount of content that it holds considering the area it has on the map, with so many secrets, ruins, caverns, and even a giant nail at the summit. If it isn't apparent already, Dragonspine is by far my favorite region of the game, and was honestly where a good portion of my fun came from. Now, whether that's a good or a bad thing, you'll find out later. When the game decides once in a blue moon to pull out those cutscenes, they look really good. The feeling of just fuck yeah! With Diluc wrecking house on the Abyss mages, as well as Childe pulling out his Abyss form under constrained time is just amazing. I'll also compliment the presentation by saying that the character design is one of the best things about this game. There's something really distinct about these characters' art and how they bring out the personality and traits of the person. Some characters don't exactly resonate with me personally, but I think that's just more of a thing of what kind of tropes I like. I suppose my favorite designs would be that of Dialuk, Childe, especially with his delusion in abyss form, good fucking lord, that shit is insane, Zhongli, Zhao, and Kaya. And no, I don't just mean all of that with the amount of art this game has gotten. Calm your ass. You can do your business elsewhere. I don't care, but not here. While on the topic of characters, I actually do like quite a few of their personalities and stories. The sight of Childe, for instance, one of the 11 Harbingers and a hell of a warmonger, try his damnedest to play along with his younger brother Tacer to protect not only his darker side, but also Tacer's childhood innocence, presenting his weakness to us, his supposed enemies, is so damn soul-crushing. He's not just an obligatory, completely irredeemable bad guy like the other Harbingers we know of. He's a man fighting for his country and Archon, having a deep admiration for Zhongli and the player character, even saying that if it wasn't for his job, he would easily join our side. Hell, even with the knowledge of a rematch in the eventual future, and knowing the context around this war he is fighting, Childe is more than happy to invite us over to his house and family afterwards. After playing that chapter, I can safely say I do understand the appeal of his character even outside of ships. Now of course, there are more than just Childe I like. But if I mentioned all of her beats similar to what I just did, this video would be way longer than it already is. So, suffice to say, the characters as a whole, design-wise and personality-wise, can be a slam dunk. Aside from all that, Genshin is also really solid with its music. I can't even think of a particular track I dislike off the top of my head. They're all just generally solid. And when they are good, they are great! Some of my favorites would have to be Storm Terror's Lair, Liyue Harbor, which for some reason reminds me of Gale of Darkness's Gadeon Port, Liyue's battle theme, Storm Terror's battle theme, both phases of Andreas, and all three phases of Childe, especially that third. Moving on from the presentation side of things and onto gameplay, the elemental interaction system is a neat idea, and has some really good potential in it. In such circumstances where it works really well, creating more of an emphasis on the effects of the elements, the havoc they bring, as well as how it impacts the characters you choose, the artifacts you select, hell even the bonus you get in certain party compositions. cause a mighty detonation with some fire and lightning, shock your foes in the form of continuous damage with water and lightning, decrease the defense of enemies with some ice and lightning, buff the elemental power of conditions like ice, fire, lightning, and water with the power of wind, creating a maelstrom that blows through everything, and even creates an elemental shield for your party, based on the element inflicted and the earth as a catalyst. That's really cool! You really don't get to see earth used often as an element in games, much less as something that's not just equated to blunt damage or grouped in with plants. As of the current writing of this video, there are no dendro or plant characters in the game, so who knows what that could bring to the table. Mixing and matching these elements and the characters together into different combinations is where much of the enjoyment with the combat comes from. Just that kind of visceral satisfaction of having those team comps that just absolutely blow through the enemies in your way. And if I have to say what my favorite combat-based encounter would be, then the honor would easily go to Childe, aka Tartaglia. It's the general recipe for a boss that I'm bound to like. An enemy that might as well be an opposing rival to you, the player. Fights using cool, stylish elements / weapons, clear telegraphs for attacks, fitting openings, good music, and of course develops as the fight goes on, creating a gradual increase in difficulty. And given the type of boss he is, I feel completely fine with the often very slow and deliberate swings he has, considering just how fast he can deplete your character's health, especially with higher world levels at his third phase. It makes sense to have a focus on precise strikes that have good tells and windows for punishment, especially considering that he doesn't really flinch. Even really dangerous attacks like him pulling out a fucking whale and diving onto your face have plenty of wind-up and can be dodged with either enough practice or alternatively timing in regards to your ultimate or run. Speaking of ultimates, I wasn't all that fond of its direction at first when playing through the game. For what might oftentimes be really flashy and powerful attacks, I wanted them to be a little harder to charge up. That way they felt more special and more like a game changer whenever you did pull one out. But after enough time, I've come to realize that the game really wants you to use them. Depending on characters, builds, and more, they can charge stupid fast. And considering the havoc they bring, as well as how some can stack and stay there, even when swapping, there really isn't a combat opportunity where you shouldn't use the ultimate. More importantly, like the activation of a distortion or overdrive in BlazBlue, they can be incredibly safe due to iframes. So, if you're in a tight bind, have a dangerous attack approaching, or just want to deal some damage to enemies, especially if they are vulnerable, just straight up use it. Though, in the prior cases, be careful with your timing, else, like in the Childe fight, you're going to get whaled. Welp, that's the end of that section. Y'all can see the rest of this video's time length, right? Oh yeah. Now the real shitstorm is going to kick in! Starting off small, because trust me, I have a lot to say, I'm going to reiterate earlier on what I said about presentation and graphics. There's a reason why I said, but at a surface level glance, the game looks pretty decent. Because while I am not the greatest of graphics and spec-heavy people, I still certainly felt and noticed when this game had some blemishes, and oh boy did it! For reference, I am using a PS4 with a recording setting of 1080 HD 60 FPS, and it is able to handle the vast, gigantic land of Tsushima just fine, without any hiccups or stuttering. Meanwhile, in Genshin, the amount of times I've had textures and entire settlements had to fully load in from going into an area, seeing the changing grass and landscape just randomly or I guess because of time of day, and instances where the game just straight up stutters even when not in combat and with loads of particle effects going on is absolutely insane. For various reasons that I have had explained to me, among them being overused detailed bloom effects, unoptimized particle effects, a global illumination system, and more, this game just for whatever reason does not perform well. And personally, I think the art style of the game exacerbates these issues, making it more noticeable because of how everything looks. So when I am noticing these moments of severe pop-in, texture loading, and just straight up lag, even when not in multiplayer, it really takes me out of the experience and world this game has so delicately crafted. Best part about all of this is something attributed to one specific enemy in the entire game. A factor so hilariously bad that it actively hinders gameplay. In the fight against the electro-hypostasis, one of the moves it can pull out is what I lovingly refer to as bullet hell. Not because of the amount of projectiles, but because those projectiles actually place you in hell! My god! I can barely dodge all these waves without getting hit considering the length of his attack. It's one thing to notice all of the above issues and be taken out of the world by them, but it's an entirely separate, bigger issue when that unoptimized performance of the game and the bullshit on screen actively destroys my control of it. And considering the fucking damage these things can do, that's not a good thing in the slightest. Another thing that's on the lower end of the spectrum for me, the story. While quite a few of the characters I enjoy and like, the main story we have currently isn't exactly the most enjoyable, and kind of feels generic in a way. Sibling goes missing, go on a journey meeting all sorts of people and traveling across various lands, solving various problems in order to meet with 7 figures of great importance, all while stopping a conspiracy that is unraveling. You want to know what it feels like? Pokemon! Down to the various places you go, people you meet, 7 obstacles to overcome, and a villain group in the background. However, I do put key emphasis on the currently part, because for all I know, and judging by the storyline preview, that it could get more interesting. But as of now, it isn't all that exciting. Plus, combined with a gigantic issue later, and the story and the chapters' payoff don't exactly feel all that worth it. Getting back to the combat, just now on the other side of the fence, I'm going to say that it can often be filled with strict stipulations that can outright punish you if you don't have that one thing. Many enemies throughout the game you see have gimmicks involved with them, most often in the form of an elemental shield that reduces the damage you give out until it is broken. Damage can be done through the shield, more often than not through small elemental interactions, but it is minuscule in comparison to what it is like without it. Because of how these shields reduce damage, your only solution is to either utilize a character who directly counters that shield, or alternatively, slowly chip away at the main health bar and your sanity. All the while, considering that you can't switch party members mid-combat understandably, meaning that you're going to have to disengage, and once again, the fact that I did all of this free, and you can see the problem, right? With more characters and options to use, this isn't even an issue. But early on, it can be agonizing to fight a Geofaltui skirmisher without a greatsword character, or alternatively, an electro skirmisher who has his barrier up. Meanwhile, I don't have any ice character on the current party, so I have to chip away at the main health bar bit by bit with fire for a solid minute. Oh, but it ain't just the skirmishers, boyo. Other enemies do this as well. Take, for instance, the wood shield miniatures, which very specifically require fire to burn away the shield because, oh hey, it's wood. Sounds cool on paper, however, it is only fire that does that effect. Nothing else helps you get through the shield faster, much less deal with the miniature quicker aside from fire interactions. And considering that you start the game with only one fire character, that being fucking Amber, it isn't all that fun to deal with. I understand that the developers really do want every element or character archetype to be useful in their own right, but this kind of strict design philosophy almost betrays the idea of mixing and matching, as I said earlier, by mandating specific characters for these types of enemies, not allowing for any other variables. Don't have a greatsword for Geohypostasis? Get fucked. No water for Pyro Abyss Mages or Regis Vine? Suffer. Hell, how effective the character dishes out their respective element is also a factor, making the process vary between all these cases. Now granted, the game does give out 3 other characters for free at the start of the game along with your main character, who has Wind, as well as about 2 to 3 other characters that can be gained through other means. Barbara just by simply claiming her in the wish menu after Act 3 of the prologue, Noelle through the beginner's wish banner, and Jean Lane who can be claimed after making it through floor 3, chamber 3 of the Spiral Abyss, which only unlocks at AR 20, but I will get to that later. While on the topic of characters, if the mixing and matching of team compositions is what can make the combat pretty enjoyable, then the slow acquiring of characters via gacha luck is what drags it down by a crawl. The combat within the first 5 to 7 hours of the game is so damn repetitive and boring, it is honestly insane. Because until you get those random gacha characters, until you claim those banners, you are doing the same 4 characters, the same 4 elements, the same 4 interactions over and over again. There's no variety within this portion, no substance to be had. Furthermore, this is the beginning of the game, might I add. So, oh boy, what a great first impression. I nearly stopped playing the game right there and then after a ley line, just because of how not fun the interplay between these 4 characters were. In hindsight, I wasn't swapping between characters all that often, trying to get a more solo experience, making things ultimately more frustrating for me. But I would argue that the value out of handling a character is imperative and more important than any interplay you could have in a team dynamic. If a character you get doesn't feel all that fun to play, then regardless of how good they are, in a meta sense or what role they might play, I'm going to more often than not put them on any of my teams. Astral Chain, for example, also has a focus on the interplay between you and your party members, the Legions. But the game understands that making the Legions fun to control by themselves is just as crucial. As such, making a system where I legitimately can't think of a single Legion that is bad, because all of them not only have a purpose or strength, but are also fun to play as. Point is, I'm not going to play as Noelle or put her on any of my teams, even if she might give me shields or a stupid defense, because her gameplay is right down there with Amber for me in terms of unfun. Which makes it all the more frustrating when you have characters like fucking Dialog, whose playstyle really resonates with me and actually has variety and combo structure with the Rekka skill he has. It's a double-sided feeling of, oh wait, holy shit, this character feels so damn good to play, and shit, I have to play the lottery machine and a chance for a character I may or may not get, much less even enjoy. Also, I need to grind enough Primo Gems in order to even roll a sufficient amount. Fortunately, I was lucky enough to get a Dialog early on, but my point still stands. Furthermore, even if I do get more characters, fun characters preferably, there's still the gigantic roadblock that is world scaling and catching them up to speed. There are 3 defining factors in terms of character experience: level, artifacts, and talents, all of which require a sufficient to ludicrous amount of grinding depending on how far you are into the game. Level is of course gained by slaying enemies in the world, but I hate to burst your bubble, bub, because that shit ain't going to fly. the amount of experience gained from enemies is fucking tiny! So tiny that even with a dedicated round of farming, you're not going to be able to level up any of your characters. Instead, the main source of levels comes from these books you gather on your journey as you complete various objectives. There are free variations for these books, and each version aggregates a certain amount of experience to the character you use it on, as well as having a limited number. And after saying that word, you can already imagine the problem I'm getting at, right? Earlier on, it might not be too bad, but once you start getting further and further into the game, into higher world levels where the enemies get stronger, you are going to need to pump so many fucking books into a character in order to make them level up by a certain amount. Because, oh hey, if you don't, you aren't going to do shit to the enemies and are going to get absolutely destroyed. So at a certain point, and after getting enough characters, the problem then becomes that considering the stock of books you have, there are only two options. Either level up only a select squad of characters, your main team going forward, so that way they can deal with the progressing world levels and allow you to survive, all while not being able to use anyone else because of how weak the rest are. Or alternatively, try to evenly level up all the characters to make them usable, but know that in terms of character level, you are most likely going to be greatly behind. Take note, both suck. But wait, if it is a limited supply, how do you get more books? Well, assuming there aren't other things out in the world to do or get, there is a solution. The Blue Leyline Blossom, which puts you through a small enemy challenge before requiring you to use original resin to even get the books from the blossom. Even then, without using a condensed resin, which can only be obtained at a high enough reputation level in Liu, you only get a varying amount depending on AR. Meaning that if you want to get a good stock up and go through a ton of characters or levels later down the line, you're going to have to grind a fuck ton. And considering everything else you have to grind in the game and original resin, which acts as the game's damn energy system, it is one hell of a balancing act. Artifacts and talents also abide by a similar system, with artifacts taking the role as gear you equip to your characters in order to give them various buffs, and talents as a unique level up material which are used to upgrade your characters' moves and traits in battle. And without going too much further, because this is already a long-ass video as is, but both of these systems also suffer from the same problems as the books in terms of progression in the game and characters. Talents more so because of how many you need through a character's talent tree, as well as how there are multiple variations with characters adhering to specific versions, generally depending on where they are from or other things like that, and their limited availability in dungeons depending on the day. Meanwhile, with artifacts, you get a good amount of them, as well as a large variety to customize with, but the more characters you try to build and the more you level up artifacts, especially ones that are way better, and the more you're going to have to gather a sufficient amount of sacrificial artifacts. Also, this might be a tiny issue, but the variety of artifacts as it stands is kind of killed off by the extreme focus this game has with doing things as fast as possible. So many overworld challenges, domains, and more require you to kill things in a fast enough time or before time runs out, and as a result, this game starts to become more and more about how high your DPS is to keep up with all of that, plus the increasing world level as you get further into the game. An escalating arms race, so to speak. Now, this would be where I would talk about my biggest problem with the game, one that I've already mentioned quite a bit at this point, but I want to save that for last on my list of complaints. So instead, let's talk about the list of quite frankly disappointing bosses in the game. Aside from Childe, much of the game's roster thus far are split into three categories: okay encounters that aren't anything outstanding, but also aren't the worst to ever exist, boring slogfests that don't offer much interesting, or annoying pieces of shit that test you in every sense of the word. I'll try to abbreviate my thoughts on all of them to make this not last too long, but no promises here. They're plants, and that's about it, honestly. They are quite accurate in that regard, having the flow and pacing of real-life flora. Already mentioned it before with the bullet hell attack, and that's pretty bad. But other than that, and the annoying revive gimmick that requires a fire character to quickly destroy the crystals, it's fine. That being said, I have to give it the shifty eyes for being very similar to a certain stack of cubes that can also form into various weapons from a certain other game made by the wonderful folks over at Platinum. Just like Aleph, it is only okay. Outside of a few things like the forced inclusion of a glider, which can be awkward, and the strange decision to make it so that the orbs it sucks in also have to have a shockwave come out after it does so. Like, why? Granted, you can just nullify it by standing at the complete opposite edge of the arena, or alternatively using an ult or timed run, but why must absorbing orbs result in this? The most boring boss in the game by a landslide. If I and everyone else can call Zora Magdaros from Monster World Cannon and Ballista Simulator 2018, then I want to hereby refer to this boss as Pillar Smacking Simulator 2020. It's as stimulating as it sounds, people. Smack the pillar it is staying on over and over again until you break it, then unleash your ult on the core, rinse and repeat. Made even more tedious and annoying by the necessity of Greatsword to basically expedite the process and not to make it last a million years. Fuck this boss. My award for most annoying and worst designed boss in the entire game. Because you know what I love? A boss that doesn't fight, but rather lets its minions do it. Want to know what's even better? Those summons being completely random in terms of what they will be, as well as the order of which, meaning that you have to be ready and prepare beforehand for any one of the clones it could potentially call up, as well as how they attack, especially if it is those fucking raptors that can only be hit by ranged or large AoE attacks. Or how about those godforsaken frogs and finches that leave behind one last present in the form of that, which just so happens to be much larger than they appear to be. Oh, but want to know the best thing of all, on top of everything else, plus the ludicrous damage they can deal and the number of which that can spawn later on? How about that this is all a timed DPS test? Don't eliminate all the clones in time, die by the mystical and forbidden art of kill you. It's meh. Presentation-wise, it's pretty good, music especially, but it suffers a bit from the same syndrome as the Regis Vines, where in order to deal damage to the main health bar, you have to break the boss's shield. Unlike the Regis Vines, however, any damage will work, and the boss gives you time to attack its claws or head. That being said, it does appear this boss suffers from some technical issues, as whenever the boss initiates its ultimate, a forced cutscene plays, but the actions you were doing beforehand is still playing, resulting in you falling to your death and having to go through a loading screen if, say, you tried to glide over to a platform next to you just beforehand. And while I have not encountered it personally, the fight does feature apparently some timed DPS bullshit, wherein which if you take too long to kill him after he uses his ultimate for a second time, energy lightning will pester you throughout the entire rest of the battle. This isn't good design, if I'm going to be honest. This isn't even fair balancing to make the fight harder. This is just a really dumb decision that feeds into the DPS stonk meta the game is defined by, creating a fake sense of urgency that can only be solved by feed it more damage. Everything just becomes a clusterfuck at that point in the fight, and guys, if you want to create fun and challenging fights, how about you start by making a well-designed fight? Why can't you all be like Chill Day? Moreover, the story version of the fight is the only one in the entire game thus far to have this weird aerial shooter section, and it might just be the worst one I've experienced yet, even more than DMC1's Mundus and the hell that is the Planetary Fortress escape scene from Wonderful 101. It is just so goddamn boring! The attacks are stupid easy to dodge, and even when hit, deal a pitiful amount of damage, and has a lot of forced chasing, which just involve you flying through rings to get closer and shoot the big obvious weak point. It is such a forgettable and questionable design inclusion that in all future domain fights of Dvalin, it just gets straight to the second phase. Quality stamp of assurance right there, people. Hands down, the most disappointing and mediocre boss in the entire game. And it really hurts to say that, because everyone had only said good things about him before my fight, and he was considered the best boss in the game prior to Chill Day. Once again, similar to Dvalin, it's the shtick of all graphics and presentation, no substance. Except it's even worse, I'd say, because it's got way more issues. Issues that include awkward, long-winded openings that do not befit the boss's nature and may as well have a giant, red, impact font, all caps, kick me sign over it, also featuring little to no feedback with my attacks, making me feel like I'm whacking away at a mannequin. Extremely easy attacks with long, dragged-out wind-ups that are pitiful to dodge. An interval in the fight that is designed to only look cool, and that's that. All this section does is waste time on subsequent runs and not allow you to hit the boss until it says you can. DPS timer problem once again from Dvalin, this time with the damn interlude. If you take too long to get him to about 50%, he will enter into issue number 3 regardless of what state he is in, and begin phase 2 afterwards. Yet another problem from Dvalin, and that would be the too much shit syndrome. This doesn't apply to phase 1 or the interval, but mainly in the second phase, where you have everything he could do before, plus more, as well as this ice rain constantly dropping on your head for a good 30 seconds, all while you're trying to attack his obvious as hell mannequin times. Once you get to 20% health, Andres decided to take this even further by adding in fucking spirit wolves that, while don't do much damage, persist throughout the rest of the fight on top of everything else he does. And finally, this fucking roar. I have no clue what procs this roar. I have no clue how to avoid it. I have no clue what to do about it. I have no clue why the ice pillars around the arena just drop and hurt you at the tail end. I have no clue if I'm supposed to attack them or him. And I have no fucking clue how to get more footage of this attack, because in all of my attempts against him, he's only done it once! In my first battle! I don't care how pretty the battle might look with the stars in the sky during the transformation, nor about the admittedly cool music if the fight doesn't play well and isn't fun. And well, it isn't. It truly felt like the embodiment of throw every single thing we can into this boss and on screen to make it all look impressive, rather than focusing down on a few core aspects of the fight and perfecting it. Hence why I like Chill Day so much. He's simple, yeah, but he works well, damn it! Moreover, while I like being able to refight all these bosses, the necessity of their drop rates with many characters' leveling increases all of his quandaries even further. Even Chill Day, for as good as he is, starts to feel a little less special when I can only fight him once a week for his drops, and then he just buggers off. But none of those issues, none of them, shine quite as much in comparison to what is by far my biggest gripe with the game. One that actively made my playthrough of the current content a nightmare. The adventure rank requirements. Oh God. So, In addition to all the other levels and objectives to upgrade throughout your journey, you also have what is known as Adventure Rank. Basically, you're standing within the world that allows you to fight harder challenges, unlock more content out of the game, as well as escalate the world, the enemies within, and the items you obtain. It's a system that is supposed to advance as you get farther into the game, essentially. And you know, the idea is fine on paper. Plus, looking at all the various ways you can get points for it, it sounds easy. Oh, you poor sweet child. Allow me to illustrate for you what actually happened to me during a certain section of the game and the story that followed. So, here I am nearing the end of Act 2 of the prologue. I've gone through that shitty forced stealth section, done a lot of talking, collected these damn tears, and now I'm atop a stormy cliff in an attempt to lure Dvalin over here and hopefully knock some sense into him. A cutscene plays, the dragon is here, we're actually talking for once, and then all of a sudden, an Abyss Mage shows up and destroys the harp, with both it and Dvalin flying away once again. Oh, but that wasn't what broke me. It was right about here. What does this graphic mean? Well, for you poor sorry souls, I'll explain it in layman's terms. You can't continue with the game story right now, come back later. Yep, that's right. The equivalency of getting hit with the hard and oh so frustrating reality of you aren't tall enough to partake in this ride. You aren't old enough to drive, etc. In order for me to continue with the story and end off this chapter, I need to acquire a high enough adventure rank, disregarding the awkward as hell pausing from the story that I just want to finish. It was at this precise moment where the rest of the game's tone and pacing set in, and where I became absolutely livid. I was done for the night. I logged off, closed down the game, and did something more worthwhile with my time. Now, here's why all of this was so bad in the first place. First, you don't have access to everything at the very start. You don't have daily quests, don't have weekly bosses, don't have the Abyss. Resin is a limited resource as always. Most of the dungeons are too high of a level for me to take on, and while you do have about 3 world bosses, good fucking luck taking those things down considering your potential level and the damage they deal. And second, the AR scaling is fucking bonkers. Notice this chart right here. At first, the scaling for around the beginning 10 levels is very generous. In fact, you advance from level 1 to 2 within the following first free tutorials given to you by the game. But then right around the mid-teens range is where we run into a problem, and where I was at when I was given that AR requirement. In order to continue the story, I would have to get to level 18. At the very end of Act 2, I am halfway through level 15, 1078 out of 2000. Once again, not everything is available to the player until they reach a high enough AR. So, in order to progress a whole 3 levels, what would otherwise be a simple affair in any other RPG, I have to spend the entirety of which bumble-fucking around looking for chests to open, teleports to activate, and of course, using the limited resin I have to use at this point in the game. Add in the minuscule experience these methods give to me, and I start to go fucking insane! I shit you not, I spent the entire evening and night leading into around 3 in the morning, starting from like 7 p.m. doing that shit. It was so damn exhausting! Why yes, I do know more about this game's world, and have certainly interacted with it more than most if not all other open worlds I have. But that didn't mean I enjoyed it. In fact, forcing me to go through with all of it made me like it and everything else within the game even less. by making the exploration of the world and all of its assets forced through the chokeholding of the story. It ruins one of the core strengths of the open world genre and makes you feel like you are doing chores on a shopping list rather than being some brave adventurer facing unknown perils. Hence why I like Dragonspine so much. Not only was it new content for me to face, but it was also content I didn't have to worry about approaching without a leash tying me back to my AR. I didn't have to worry about any kind of requirement and can do what I damn well please. This leash principle was such a gigantic issue to me that I absolutely refused to engage with any part of Chapter 1 until I was at a high enough level where I could go through it all without any grind breaks. I was AR 27. 4,288 experience out of 5,150 when I started doing some research. Want to know the ending AR with Act 3? 35. And do you want to know the level gap between each act? 5 from where the prologue ended off. 6 between Act 1 and Act 2. And another 6 between Act 2 and Act 3. You have to grind a whole fucking 17 levels to do all of Chapter 1 at the AR level you can finish the prologue with. It took 11 days, a fucking week, and 4 days for me to level up by 8 levels and do all of Chapter 1. This single factor is so damn obtrusive that it actively ruins the fun you could have in the moment, and is by far the biggest make or break aspect of the game, because all while you are grinding AR, every other slight annoyance or aspect about the game gets intensified as if it was under a damn microscope, just cause of how everything you're doing ties back into it. But with all that said, what are my final thoughts on the game? Genshin Impact was a very interesting experience for me, as you can all clearly tell by my reactions. And as my first foray into the gacha genre, I was definitely treading some murky waters. But covering a game like this, one that is actively being expanded upon thus far with an update every 6 weeks, with new events, banners, and more, definitely time capsules this video and makes it hard to talk about. Future updates could certainly change things for the better, improve upon the base foundation, and fix many of the problems that I and other people have with it. Because as an updating game, content such as Resin will have to be updated with future domains as well as bosses, or alternatively, how already despite only clearing 2 chapters, I have already reached world level 5 in mid-high 60s. So how will future updates and regions take that into consideration with the difficulty curve and more? And as I have admitted earlier, aspects such as party customization become not as problematic with more characters and, admittedly, not adhering to a free-to-play style. Ultimately, the conclusion I have come to might confuse many of you, knowing that I have just spent the last 7-ish pages of the script ranting. But I will continue playing the game, if lightly. Because strangely enough, after being done with the main story, I have been experiencing a better time overall with the game. Just being able to take my time and do what I want to upgrade characters, deck them out, and more without worrying about the AR leash. Content such as Dragonspine and Chile's fight in terms of gameplay are the best in the game, and much of the presentation within is definitely praiseworthy considering that all of this is for free. Also, call it stubbornness or whatever, but I feel a sort of curiosity now to see this journey through till the end, for better or worse. My personal wish at the moment is to either see the complete removal of the AR leash from story progression, or alternatively, see the gaps between massively toned down if it absolutely has to stay there. because if that one single thing was fixed, then so many of my other complaints would be scaled down quite a bit, and I would overall be able to have the Dragon Spine experience hopefully throughout the rest of the game. Ultimately, there isn't any harm in trying out Genshin if you truly are curious. The game, after all, is completely free and is available for PS4 and 5, PC, mobile, and at some point later down the line, Nintendo Switch. Just be warned that going in, there are several massive roadblocks throughout the game that can easily crush you and your investment, especially if you are blind for the most part. Do yourself a favor and plan ahead when it comes to factors such as AR grinding. Look up videos, guides, the official wiki, and whatnot to help give you information on the game's systems, resin, and more. Anything to help you out, regardless of how small it might be, makes a massive difference. Also, if you do intend to use money on this game, look, be responsible with it, okay? Consider everything else going on in your life, your needs, and more before dropping down the bucks. Because as we all know from these gachas as well as mobile games, it can all vanish in the blink of an eye. Wait, I just now realized. I've set in stone the fact that I'm probably going to have to cover this game once again when it gets finished. Well, shit.